Hi, everyone. I'm Matt, and once a week I break down world building tricks, tips, and techniques. And this week we're doing something very special with our very first world building guest, fantasy author John Bierce. Bierce? Is that how you say it? Bierce.
Bierce, yep.
All right. And full disclosure, John and I are on a writing Slack group together, so we know each other. We have supped together. We have drank together. We have exercised together, which I cannot say of any other writer, which is why it is so nice for John to come on here and discuss his world building process. And
I gotta say, Matt is in much, much better shape than I am.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I will definitely keep that in the edit. And since I know John so well, I thought that I would have Chat GPT or whatever it is write up his introduction, and let's see how well it does. It says, John Bierce is a talented author known for his gripping and imaginative storytelling. With a passion for fantasy and science fiction, Bierce has created a diverse range of worlds and characters that captivate readers of all ages. He is best known for the acclaimed series, The Mage Chronicles, which has gained a devout following for its intricate world building and complex plot lines. He currently resides in Vietnam, where he fosters strange sandwiches and eats kittens. Doesn't seem right.
No, I don't eat kittens.
That was my addition, since I know you foster and have strange sandwiches.
Yeah. Some of that's right. I write Mage Errant, not Mage Chronicles, and it's.
I knew that would wind you up, so I thought, what?
I hate robots.
I know you do. I
hate robots so much. So, there's an old comic, Magnus Robot Puncher, and every time ChatGPT comes to a conversation, I have to struggle with the urge not to just post covers from Magnus Robot Puncher 4000 or whatever.
So would you like to correct anything in the other than Mage Errant?
I mean, most of it's just, it was so generic, it's not really wrong or anything.
I was going to say, it was so gripping. It used a lot of adjectives without actually stating anything.
Exactly. I mean, that's just a common thing throughout all of the, generative AI tech. There's nothing intelligent about it, but all the
yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, we will go on a long tangent, I know, if we don't. So
sorry.
So could you, I assume we're going to talk mostly about Mage Errant. Would you like to give a quick elevator pitch of the story and the series itself, I guess I should say?
So Mage Errant is a wizard school progression fantasy novel in the relatively new subgenre progression fantasy, which is for people who like training montages in movies way too much. It follows Hugh of Emblem, a very socially awkward, anxiety-ridden protagonist who would really rather not be the protagonist. And it features an incredibly intricate magic system, heavily inspired by real-life science. It takes your basic elemental system, and along with fire magic and water magic and stone magic, adds in hair magic and glass magic and paper magic and anything and everything. I just kind of go nuts with it. And then lean in how actually would these things chemically interact, physically interact, and to build the magic off of. Yeah, and then I also have a standalone novel in the same multiverse, The Rack, which was a very, very poorly timed epidemiological fantasy novel following a plague crossing a continent. They came out right at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. Just not great timing, but another hard science, low magic fantasy setting.
Yeah, my wife and I used to love playing the game Pandemic and we've not taken it out of the box ever since the real pandemic. It just stopped being fun. So you have my sympathies for the poor release timing. Yeah, I think there's the story of there was supposed to be what was it, Forrest Gump 2, and they were supposed to have the meeting of it on 9/11, and they're like, well, that's a bad sign, and so supposedly the meeting never happened because so I guess it could be worse. Is philosophy.
I had a lot of friends accuse me of starting the pandemic as a promotional device, and it's just like, no.
No, you got to fire your marketing team if that's the case.
Yeah, I should have done my due diligence in hiring the marketing team. They went a little overboard.
So can you give me a quick elevator pitch of the world itself? You mentioned the magic system. Is there anything else that's special that you would say is a selling point of Mage Errant?
Um, I decided to keep it mostly Earth-like, and then gave it a huge ass moon. Um, the moon is a significant portion of the planet itself. It's more Anastas and its moon orbit each other rather than one orbiting the other. Um, similar size comparison to Pluto and its moon Charon. So this gives Mage Errant the average height tide is 30 feet, just normal day, 30-foot tides. So there's not a lot of people living on the sea unless they're up on like cliff sides.
Mm-hmm.
Very geologically active planet. Um, and it is a very high magic setting. And so you get a lot of cities that have been just extremely affected by having magic, Um, and the magic is kind of the direct impacts the world and then goes away. There's not a lot of lingering magic except for enchantments and stuff. So it's things you get cities like I've got one city that's made entirely out of columnar basalt, and then it has huge enchantments to take the heat that hit the basalt during the day, use that to boil seawater, and then get drinking water and then have salt to export, Or I'll have another city that's built on top of a giant volcanic plateau in the middle of the desert, magically pumps up water deep from aquifers, Another city that's an old series of like limestone quarries dug way deep into the sea cliffs, and the entire city is just cliffside dwellings built into the side of this maze of old quarries.
Mm-hmm.
And there's wizards just flying around in there and stuff. And so I just went nuts with it and just had magic resculpt the landscape and create these huge, crazy locales.
I'm impressed that you went with the moon right off the bat. That's usually the science fiction domain. We don't really, fantasy, we don't, like, oh, we have two moons, and then like never really look at it again because moons are scary. Like, just like, oh, the title stuff. And then, no, we're like, yeah, two moons pulling at the same time. Like, it looks cool in Star Wars, but man, I don't want to have to figure out the, ramifications on the world itself. So good on you for going just right off the bat. Like, big old change. So, and question about the process, yourself, like, because obviously, well, you've thought about this quite a bit and have gamed out the magic system and the world itself. Are you more of a plotter or a pantser when it comes to the world building itself?
I'm somewhere in between. Um, I when it comes to my world building, as opposed to my actual story, I tend to start in kind of like a scrap heap sort of mind frame. Like I'm like, I like this thing, I like this thing, I like this thing. How can I make a world where these all fit? What traits? What's going on? And then once I have a vague idea of what sort of stuff I'd like to include, I then figure out what's the cosmology here. Like in Mage Errant, I've got, the giant moon. My next series, it's going to be a minor spoilers for my next upcoming series, More Gods and Stars. The planet is going to be tidally locked to a gas giant, which is not that uncommon of a setting in science fiction. That's what's kind of going on in the Avatar movies, right?
Mm.
So every day, if you're on the right hemisphere, in the correct hemisphere, there's going to be eclipse going, sometime during the day, depending on where you are. And so yeah, I get that. I figure out the cosmology, what's going on with the geology, then build up the magic system after that. Usually out of the scrap heap ideas that I've included. I built up the ecology, deciding this is basically Earth-like, but maybe with a few weird species. Like this snake is blue and it's poisonous as well as venomous, right? Which is the route I took with the rack. Or do I want to go with a weird ecology? Like Mage Errant has an ecology that is mostly invasive species. Because there are all these, again, minor spoilers, there are all these extra dimensional entryways from other worlds in the multiverse, and species just flood in all the time. Build up there, and then I go and I build some degree of history, not too much, because I believe that there is a history trap in world building, where creators will just start building history and history and history, and then they'll, when they actually get to writing, well, it'll take them ages to actually get the writing. And when they actually get there, they feel too bound by the history that exists. Whereas if you only build up a certain degree, then it's easier to be like, I make up this bit of history to figure out to justify this or to explain this.
That's, yeah, the irony of the, you know, a lot of times you get caught in the idea that the world serves the story. I'm sorry, the story serves the world. They're like, well, this is the history, so how do I bring the history into? They're like, oh no, you only need the details of the world itself for the part of the story. You only need to reveal it for the story, or just make it up whole cloth. You know, well, not whole cloth, but yeah. Do you? I like the idea of the scrap heap. That's very much the kind of building up and building out idea that I talk about a lot. That you know, you have something that exists, and then you try to figure out the rules behind it, and then you extrapolate from it. And calling it a scrap heap feels very much like my own process a lot of times. It's like, oh, I've got this idea, this scene, this feel, and then like, how do we work from that itself? Where in the process of the world did the characters and story come in? Like, what popped up first for you in Mage Errant, I guess?
You know, the characters, at least the main character, was the second thing to pop up, right? Even before the moon, right? Like, the first thing that popped up in Mage Errant is the deep underpinnings of the magic system, and that of being like how, you know, magical law of physics, the magic actually works, right? And I designed this whole, you know, magic flows through this whole aquifer-like system. Not important, you know, it's the whole thing. And then right after, the main character Hugh popped up, right? You know, shy, awkward, anxiety-ridden protagonist, right?
And did, like you were calling him a protagonist, did the idea of the story come along with him, or did you have a character in a location and then the story evolved from there?
The latter. Especially the first book of Mage Errant, there was a lot of discovery writing figured in. It wasn't until well into the second book that I had a really fleshed out idea of where the series was going to go, how long it was going to be.
You're in 7 books now?
I'm working on the 7th book. I'm a few days away from sending it out to my beta readers and editors, I think.
That's awesome.
And then also got a short story collection after that, which is already done. But yeah, but then, you know, the rack, very, very different. You know, I came up with the morphology of the disease first of all, how it works, what's going on. And then there are no real protagonists other than the actual disease in the book. It's a novel in stories. And I discovery wrote to a huge extent, going through, just showing different places and times and what's going on in different parts of the world. My only real rule of thumb is I have to show at least one clue as to what's going on with the disease every chapter. You know,
it's out throughout the and then so an understory, I guess, to the with all the clues set aside to put it together. That's I applaud the effort on that, but man, that's a lot of effort.
Yeah.
Oh, how do you keep track of your world? Do you use the Bible or just wing it?
I do have something of a world Bible, but for the most part, I wing it. I have a very good memory for my world building details. You know, what I mostly need the world Bible is for is, okay, what pieces of gear do my characters have on them? You know,
Continuity.
Yeah.
Continuity of scene rather than of scenery, I guess.
Detail. During my world building, one trick that's been absolutely important to me, like it's been just a huge help, is I've realized if you do these very detailed world building details, flesh out locations, the how and why, you know, make people understand, like say how these cities are working, how they're getting their water, everything, you earn quite a bit of world building trust. And then you can just throw out something about the reverse waterfall city, or, you know, making up random examples, right? You can just drop just tidbits for these crazy locations, not explain them at all. And people are just like, yeah, okay, what's going on there? You know, and then you just move on and they'll just trust that there's something going on there, or they'll imagine it themselves. And, you know, I don't want to do too much, but it's a great way. Like you earn a certain amount of trust, then throw extra details, make the world feel bigger. And I think it's been a huge help.
I always use the example of the Clone Wars from the first Star Wars movie. And like, you know, you've seen this world, like, oh, the world that's lived in and everything. You're like, oh yeah, the Clone Wars. And you're like, Okay, yeah, like don't need any more. In fact, it would have been better if we didn't have any details, additional details about said Clone Wars, and they were just a thing off in the distance that had happened once that made the world feel lived in. Yeah, you get
right. Before the prequels came out, I always thought the Clone Wars would be like someone is secretly copying people and the clones are trying to replace people, and
oh, that would have been good.
that would have been really good. You know, only the Jedi can tell who's the clones and who aren't. And
can you trust the Jedi? Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, we should send you back in time. If we could send the time machine, I think we would. Well, there's a lot of things that would change, but that's in there.
I would kill Hitler, but that might get rid of Star Wars, and then I gotta.
What work of fiction would you say most influenced you as a writer and world builder?
As a writer, Terry Pratchett, no question. As a world builder, I've got to go a completely different answer. I would probably have to say Larry Niven. Larry Niven, he does these crazy, to some degree hard sci-fi worlds, right? He's most famous for Ringworld, which is a giant artificial rotating band around a star. Big walls around the edges to keep the air in. It spins for gravity. Just really fun engineering problem turned into a book, right? Is it necessarily a great book? No, but it's a really fun engineering problem. And he does all these crazy worlds. Another one that's the integral trees. It's got a gaseous ring of breathable atmosphere rotating in free fall around a neutron star with another star orbiting it. So you have this entire nomadic civilization of people just flying around on these like zero gravity planets or these giant trees that spin for gravity, living in this huge zero gravity environment, right? Magnificently imaginative. It's too bad he's kind of a terrible person. He plotted with Nixon to try and reduce the number of non-white people going to hospitals. And it was by spreading conspiracies they were experimenting on spending people. Yeah, weird stuff.
Wow, I'm glad that fantasy isn't alone in having some scumbuckets in it. That yay, science fiction! Thank you for coming down to our low bar. Thank you.
Yeah. It's just one of the things. I grew up such a huge influence, and finding out that it's just like, oh man, it's no one say.
We're actually going to touch on that later. But it is interesting. I can see how, like, from what you said about, you're working in fantasy, but then you take such a strong science fiction background kind of thing of building the world itself. Like, here's a science fiction idea. Now there's a fantasy world in it. And I mean, I'm guessing when Riven wrote, because did you see the look on my face when he's like, oh, he's mentioned someone I don't know because I don't know science fiction at all. But
that's totally fair.
But I mean, that was probably back when there was much more porous line between science fiction and fantasy. Was back in the earlier days. That's weird now that I think about it, but I should probably look into that. But what work of nonfiction do you think influenced you the most?
I mean, probably my schooling. I went to school for geology, and that was probably the big. All the geology works are probably the big influence. But if I had to just name like one book that's not just generic geology textbook for mineralogy,
you could name it whatever you want, and we would not fact check you. That wasn't a challenge.
Different things for different parts of my world building. For when I'm building, societies, especially governments, James C. Scott's Seeing Like a State is just absolutely my top tier choice. It's long, little dry, but it's an in-depth anarchist analysis of how governments perceive the world, why they behave the way they do, and if I had to sum up the core idea, it's that governments, the biggest thing they're going to try to do, the biggest effort they're going to make is always going to be to make things more legible, more easy for them to understand, to survey, to census, right? They want things laid out in a way that they can understand, because you can't rule something unless you understand it. Or it's harder to rule something the less you understand it. Yeah. I should say. There are plenty of people who don't understand things who try to rule.
Yeah, kind of.
I can think of one or two.
Path of least resistance, let's keep everyone flowing along quickly and down the same stream, if you will, metaphorically speaking. That's interesting. I mean, I didn't know, but once you started, like, yeah, that's a John book. I know you've mentioned it several times. All right, so you mentioned your hard magic systems. Where do you stand on the preference as a writer, hard or soft magic systems?
I tend to write fairly hard magic systems, but I think ultimately you need to make the choice of what sort of magic system to use based on what your story and world demand, right? Like, I think there's a time and a place for both hard and soft magic systems. I think, for instance, that hard magic systems aren't necessarily better, but are easier to use um, in mystery stories, right? Especially mystery stories of the sort where you give the reader all the pieces and let them puzzle it out, right? In a noir mystery, a soft magic system would probably be easier, in my opinion.
I'm sorry, in a noir? Oh, noir. Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Actually, I was just saying this because I'm working on urban fantasy, and like as much as I like the Dresdens, like they always hide. You can't figure out the story from it. Like you can't figure out the magic. They usually hide a piece of the magic within a first-person POV, and that upsets me every time. It's like, oh, and then I have my secret thing that's going to win it. And you're like, well, you have to tell me what it is. Like it's a cheat otherwise. So yeah, I'm with you on that one. Like if you want them to be able to figure it out and marvel at your cleverness as an author because of the character's cleverness, then you have to give them all the pieces ahead of time.
Yeah. And, most noir mysteries tend to be more character pieces than fancy puzzles, right? I personally prefer writing the fancy puzzles, but
So hopefully this will become a thing in the future when I have other ones. And it is the equivalent of Mary Bang Steal, Mary Bang Steal, Mary Bang Kill. The whole idea of that you get three pieces and you have to decide which one. So this one's about world building, and it's live, steal, or erase. So the idea of that you would want to live in the world, which world you want to live in, which one do you want to steal something as an author from, and which one would you prefer if it no longer existed, or not prefer, by default, then the third one. And so let's try this out for the first time. Let's see if it works and it makes it past the editing phase. All right. Would you like to live in, steal, or erase parts from Middle Earth, Harry Potter's Wizarding World, or Narnia?
I would like to live in. Oh, that is tough. That is tough. I would like to live in Narnia, steal parts of Middle Earth. I totally haven't done that already. No. And erase Harry Potter.
Really? This is, again, I should have mentioned this. This is not what we think about the authors or stuff. Because personally, I would live in Harry Potter. It seems a lot of fun and safer than all the others. So
definitely safer. But even ignoring what I think about the authors, which is lefty as I am, it's not difficult to figure out. The Harry Potter world, it's just got so many continuity issues, so many weirdnesses. Harry Potter, I loved Harry Potter so much as a kid, but always for character purposes and always for the pretty good plots, right? They're tightly plotted mysteries for the most part.
Yeah, no, I am reading. Never mind. I realized this morning. I don't know if you saw in the Slack that I've decided Harry Potter is actually portal fantasy. It is not urban fantasy. It's portal fantasy. And I've only known about it for 20 years, and I just came to that conclusion today.
You are totally right.
Thank you. I like to hear that. I don't get it much at home, so it's good to hear it from someone else. All right. Boss Log, Arcane, the TV show, or Dark Materials. Which one would you like to live in, steal a piece from, or erase?
Oh.
I know. These are made for you.
Oh, these are so difficult. Okay. The big question here is how much money do I have? Because I don't want to live in any of these worlds if I'm poor. These are all terrible worlds to live in if you're poor. Well, maybe, if I was living to the outskirts, not New Crobazon, I would want to live in Buslog. Like if I'm living in one of like the turtleback villages or something, I could do that. I could live on the back of in a village that's on the back of a giant walking turtle. Yeah, that sounds cool. Just pastoral life. I don't want to live in New Crobazon. Which one I'd steal from? I also want to steal from Boss Log. I guess I could live in the world of Arcane and be rich. I'm fine with that. If I'm rich, yeah. And then I guess erase his dark materials, which is sad. I love all three of them so much, but
that's the point of the game.
yeah.
Live, steal, or erase. Avatar the movie, Avatar Last Airbender, or Dirk Ashton's Paternus. The theme being avatars, because that's why I had to throw Dirks in there. But it is a cool world. I don't know. I'm sorry. Actually, I should have checked if you were familiar with it first.
I actually just read Paternus a few weeks ago.
Oh.
Really enjoyed it. So I would not want to live in Paternus, that's for sure. I would probably want to live in the world of The Last Airbender. Especially if I get to be a bender. That sounds cool, right?
Yeah, it's a lot more fun if you're, one of the people at the top.
Yeah, probably want to be a earthbender.
You would, yeah.
Yeah, I went to school for geology.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. Then I can't erase Paternus because my friend wrote it. Dirk's great, so I guess I'm gonna steal from Paternus. And then, sorry, Avatar, as much as I have fun watching you gotta go.
All right. Steal, marry, erase, live, steal, whatever. Yeah. Star Wars, Star Trek, Stargate.
Live in Star Trek, no question. Right? If you're not in Starfleet,
hey,
it's a paradise.
Yeah.
It's space communism, post scarcity space communism with no money and replicators, and you can just do art all the time or whatever, I would steal from Star Wars and erase Stargate.
There is no, that is the correct answer. Like, objectively, everyone agrees.
Yeah.
And this one is, again, exercise themed to just bring it all back around. Blade Runner, Running Man, Ender's Game.
I would want to live in...
Yeah, none of them are great places to live. This is
I guess you
might have to go backwards and live by default. Like, usually you're erased by default,
So I guess I'd erase Running Man.
It's pretty dystopian.
Yeah, it's pretty dystopian. I would steal from Blade Runner, which means I guess I'm living in Ender's Game, which could be worse. It's not a great life, but it's not so horrifically dystopian.
If you're not, I guess I should have said the first Ender's Game book, not when it just keeps going and going and going and going.
Yeah, and going and going.
Okay, so that takes us to the closing, which is, I think I have my most interesting question. What's the first world that you remember building?
The first cohesive, complete world I remember building was in high school. And I created some other fantasy worlds in elementary and stuff, but there were elementary school kid things with, what if the dragons were, I don't know. But the first one was in high school, and this one was set in a breathable gas giant. And all these, yeah, wizards and all these fantasy people living on floating islands inside the breathable gas giant. And there were different levels of the gas giant, where more and less light penetrated down, and you generally didn't want to live in the deeper levels with higher pressure and less light. And I remember it was actually somewhat Revolutionary War inspired, the story I had going. It was a combination of Revolutionary War and crime drama. I remember the world was called, it was Praenubulus, which is just some pseudo-Latin I hacked together, or pseudo-Greek, I don't know. That was the first world I remember building. And
it had a story too. It wasn't just a world. It had a complete, not a complete, but it had a story, a through line to it.
Oh yeah, I plotted it out. I think I still have it somewhere in storage.
Do you still find that world's fingerprints on your own work now? Because the way you described it, it was yes, that's a John world. That is a John world from the beginning. That has his hallmarks.
Yeah, it's definitely got a lot of my style already formed in it, you know, and it's kind of kept going ever since. Like just
It's the juvenilia. I think that's the term for an artist's work before they became famous. And
that is a great term.
and I noticed you made the distinction between I made elementary worlds, and then this was a high school world. What was the difference?
The elementary worlds weren't really cohesive worlds. They were just like, wouldn't it be cool if there were cyborg dragons or right? It was just random stuff. And I think one of the things is when I was a little kid, I definitely thought about becoming an author someday or a creator of some sort. Then, later in elementary and through middle school, I was just hard focused on I'm going to be a scientist, And then high school, I was back to I'm going to be an author. And then eventually in college, I'm going to be a scientist. And then eventually I just settled on author.
And as a closing question, what is some advice you would give to fellow world builders? What do you think is the most important thing to pass down?
If I had to lay down one thing, Bierce's first law of world building, it's your ability to create new and original worlds is entirely dependent on how much you know about our own, right? If you want to switch out and vary these things, you want to create something new and original, something that feels different and alien, you've got to understand our own world as well as you can. You've got to, constantly be going out, experiencing new places, trying new things. You go for novelty in our own world, study history, study science, just never stop. Just keep actively learning, pushing the boundaries of what you know about our world, and that will grow your capability to create new worlds. The one other thing I'd add, if I have a second piece, know where people are getting their drinking water from. Always know where your characters are getting their drinking water from.
That is important advice, and it makes the verisimilitude, the word that I can never say, of the world.
Yeah, verisimilitude.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yes, we know what we're saying.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, John, for coming on. Where can people get a hold of you, or do you want them to get a hold of you?
You can find me at johnbierce.com, where I have a newsletter and a blog, and I post fan art and commissioned art. You can find me on Reddit as u/John Bierce. There's our Mage Errant subreddit as well, with a few thousand people on there posting fan theories and all sorts of fun stuff. Though, be careful going on there before you've read the books. There's spoilers. You can find me on Twitter for as long as Twitter lives at I think John_Bierce. I'm on there.
Thank you, John, for coming on and being our inaugural guest of what might be Writers on Worlds. I don't know. I'm just coming up with things. But thank you for breaking us in and being such a lovely guest. And I hope everyone watching can use it to build some better worlds.